Grid Live wrap up. Another non-playoff driver wins. Now the playoff drivers are entering Talladega and nobody's secure for the next round. MotoGP, the championship. Seems like the championship nobody wants to win, but Jorge Martin, did he make a championship response in the Grand Prix of Indonesia? Plus week 26 of the Grid Ranking, Joe San Diego. And with me we have Kobe Lambert from Grid Tonight. A big thank you to our Patreon investors on the show, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew, for investing in the Grid Network. You too can invest in the Grid Network throughout 2024 and, of course, 2025. Are we starting to get ready for 2025 because the season's starting to wrap up for 2024? Let's talk about the NASCAR Cup Series Playoffs. That championship looks like it's going to start coming up towards the end as well, where we just finished the first race in the round of 12 at Kansas Speedway. And Ross Chastain, being the disruptor, earns his fifth career NASCAR Cup Series win and prevents any playoff driver from being locked in to the round of 8, the next round in the NASCAR Cup Series. So here is the playoff standings after the race. One of the big things for Ross Chastain, this has to feel huge to go out there, get a win, and in the playoffs where we know this is where the playoff drivers tend to be at their strongest. This is a track where the playoff drivers are all pushing to get a win at Kansas Speedway because the next two races, Talladega, then you have the Roval. People see them as wildcard rounds. You don't want to enter either of those races in a must-win situation. Ross Chastain and that team really stepped up, holding off William Byron in the final closing laps. A great restart. Got to give a shout out to Martin Truex Jr., who was also up there. You had two non-playoff drivers in the final restarts up there. Martin Truex Jr., what an effort. Things could have gone a little differently. I said on Saturday's show, I would not be surprised if he could pull off a win. He could finally at least say he had a good day at the racetrack. No mistakes. But for Chastain, even better. He got to smash the watermelon. He now has a win. For Trackhouse Racing, both the drivers have gotten wins. I got to say, though, it has to be a little bit bittersweet because Daniel Suarez struggled throughout the day. He got on the lead lap because of all the cautious flags we had throughout the day at Kansas Speedway. That was a big help for him and the 99 team. But overall, Trackhouse Racing, Ross Chastain, what a way to get this win. And if you think about it, what could have been a Watkins Glen had Shane Van Gisbergen not screwed up over in the bus stop chicane? We could have been talking about quite a year for Trackhouse. I still got to say, for Trackhouse Racing, this has to be a better year than what we saw last year. Suarez, Chastain, getting wins. If they could go out there and get more wins, that's going to be big news for everyone there. The big news for everyone entering Talladega, and especially in the playoff picture, nobody is really safe entering Talladega for this next round. William Byron, 34 points. That seems like a lot. But if you miss out on the stage 1 and stage 2 points, and one of the drivers lower in the playoff stands could get those stage points, and you get caught up in the big one, before you know it, that 34-point gap could be gone. We saw today how valuable it was for getting those stage points. Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, because of their issues, they missed out on valuable stage points in stage 1 and stage 2. So entering Talladega, it's going to be really interesting to see how all the drivers approach it. I think every driver in the playoff is going to be going for the stage points. You're going to be going for the wins. I don't see anybody like a Denny Hamlin doing what they did in Atlanta and just taking it easy because this race is so unpredictable. We keep thinking you're going to have the big one. This big one's going to happen. Well, we've seen several times where the big one it only involves 5 cars. Then there's another 5-car wreck. Then you have a big one coming to the checker flag. So where do you want to be? Do you want to be towards the back? Do you want to be towards the front? Towards the front, you're more likely to get in a crash, but you're also more likely to control your destiny because you're not running into the crash if the crash happens ahead of you. So Talladega is going to be a very interesting, intense race for all the playoff drivers. Out of all the drivers, any of them I think could win. You got to say, though, when it comes to getting a win, Kyle Busch. Today, he looked like that win was coming towards him. He just had to really hold off Ross Chastain. What happened as they were exiting turn two? He was coming up on Chase Briscoe. Chase Briscoe was on the tail end of the lead lap, didn't want to go lap down, left the lane open for Kyle Busch, but it was the high lane right up against the wall. Kyle Busch tried to make that pass, and it was debatable. Did Chase Briscoe leave enough space for Kyle Busch? Kyle Busch showed the way the air was working against him and the car, lost the air at the front end, car got upset. That's why he lost it. You could tell he was biting his tongue a little bit in that post-race interview. The big question is, because we heard this from Jeff Burch and from Steve Letarte, was this a bit of a dirty move, or is this hard racing and trying to stay on the lead lap? While also throwing there another thing. Chase Briscoe, besides trying to stay on the lead lap, is trying to keep the championship hopes alive for the 14 team, for Stewart Haas Racing. If he goes a lap down, there's no guarantee a caution is going to come out and he'll get the free pass. Very likely the race could have gone caution-free to the end, or maybe there's the possibility of a caution, but there's no guarantee he'll be that first car one lap down. Chase Briscoe had to do what he had to do to stay on the lead lap. That was hard racing. This is the playoffs. You cannot just allow a non-playoff driver try to get around you, lap you down. It would be different if they were both in the same manufacturer. Much more different if they were teammates. But that was not the case. Chase Briscoe, I see no wrongdoing by what he did. Just hard racing, trying to stay on the lead lap and being extra aggressive. For Kyle Busch, just unfortunate. His winless streak continues on to Talladega. For Talladega, of course, he's going to try to win there. Let's talk about two drivers that many thought would have won today. Christopher Bell, Kyle Larson, both of them failing to deliver on such hopes of a win. Kyle Larson, what happened? A flat tire early in the race. He goes up to the wall. He was lucky he was up towards the high side, because if that right rear tire had blown and he was on the low side of the turn, he would have spun and hit that outside wall much harder, potentially ending his day, similar to what happened at Atlanta Motor Speedway. He was managed to keep going, but rear damage to the diffuser all race long. That car just did not have the speed. They kept working on it, trying to get it better, but he missed out on those stage points. Christopher Bell, both times he dominated the stages. Looked like he was going to get those stage wins. But both times it did not happen. Contact with the wall, hard racing, just did not have the ability to capitalize, claim those stage points, and give himself a bigger advantage. So it was a really tough break for Christopher Bell, Kyle Larson. The two of them just not having good days. And you look at the standings, Christopher Bell plus 28, Kyle Larson plus 18. Just 10 points between those two. That's a stage win. You talk about two stage wins, it's going to be even bigger, the difference. So one of the big things is for those two drivers, they still are, I think, without a doubt, easy favorites to be in the championship four. They just have to be careful at Talladega. Don't put themselves in a situation where you're going to be in trouble. Now, most likely, the Roval race, the two of them could do really good. We know Christopher Bell could win at the Roval. Kyle Larson has been good at road courses. Talladega, just survive. I think this is going to be really interesting to see what happens in qualifying. Will the Chevrolets try to go all out for qualifying pace? Will the Toyotas do that? Try to put all the Toyotas up towards the front? It's going to be very interesting how the two drivers are going to approach Talladega. When it comes to racing, I think they're both going to be just as aggressive. They're going to both try to be up towards the front. And at the end of the day, try to get as many stage points as possible to build that buffer from the cut line. Because the first driver below the cut line, Tyler Reddick. What happened to 2311 Racing? That was just something else where we thought they would be the favorites to go in there. I said on the pre-race show, besides the Toyotas from Joe Gibbs Racing, particularly Bell, along with Hamlin, look for Tyler Reddick. Well, if you were looking for Tyler Reddick, he was not towards the front. He started up towards the front. We thought, okay, this is where it's going to go. Just did not happen. Just struggled. This team just seems to be losing that momentum. This is not that same team that ended the regular season super strong. It was just a huge surprise, I think, for a lot of folks. But we're also struggling today. It just seemed those two have missed the mark when it comes to the setup today at Kansas Speedway. And there's been no drastic changes to the racetrack. The temperatures, 70s on the air, so probably 80, maybe 90 track surface temperature. So what was the big change? That's something Tyler Reddick, I think, is going to be scratching his head on. Has to be very disappointing because now at below the cut line, you're entering Talladega. While we say Talladega is such a wild card race, if you're below the cut line, it's very easy to make a mistake and say, okay, we put ourselves in a bigger hole, and now we're in a must-win situation at the big Roval. But if you're much higher ahead, like the William Byrons, Christopher Bell, if you get caught up in that mess, you're most likely still going to be above the cut line. So this is going to be a very interesting situation for Tyler Reddick, 4:23.11. Can they make it out of Talladega above the cut line? Because then they'll be feeling pretty good entering the Roval. But if they're below the cut line, they're going to have a hard time because the Roval race, not as unpredictable as Talladega, but it's going to be a challenge for them. And of course, for all the drivers below the cut line, they've all had challenging days at Kansas Speedway. Austin Cindric spun on the backstretch, hit the inside wall. That front splitter was a little bit pointed up towards the air on the right side. Next thing you know, he's running into 30s. Towards the end of the race, when a bunch of cars took the wave around, we had over 30 cars on the lead lap. That was just not a good effort for him and that team. Just unfortunately, the luck of that occurring and the crash, not a good point day. Chase Briscoe, he just seems to be missing the mark at this racetrack, which is very unfortunate. Stewart-Haas Racing, one moment that occurred early in the race, Josh Berry was out of the race after that first lap crash. 4 flat tires, couldn't get going, but since he was involved in the crash but didn't get significant damage, he was out of the race. He was towed behind the pit wall into the garage area. So a lot of people, again, bringing up the same discussion that we saw at Watkins Glen when Ryan Blaney could not steer the car, had a little damage, but was done for. It's going to be really interesting to see if this is something NASCAR will address. I know, especially for folks that listen to Sirius XM, NASCAR Radio, that might be a question for Elton Sawyer, if that's something that could be reevaluated for 2025. Daniel Suarez. This team, it appears they just lost momentum. I thought Bristol was just okay. The surprise of the tires not doing what they thought they were going to do. The competitive of Bristol just not getting good handling setup. Little few cautions, not that many opportunities. I thought, okay, they'll come back stronger at Kansas. They did not. They were just looking pretty rough in the early stages when they were in the 30s. There was a couple times it looked like it was just above the cut line, but overall, again, not a good effort. They at least managed. They're just negative 14. That could be easily taken care of at Talladega, but a lot of things could go out of your control at Talladega. And of course, Tyler Reddick, as I mentioned, below the cut line, just did not deliver today. Definitely is going to be one of those missed opportunities where if they are out at the end of this round, they're going to be looking at what happened at Kansas Speedway. And Kansas Speedway, once again, delivering a great race from start to finish. Overall, this track, in my opinion, has become one of the best tracks in the NASCAR Cup Series. I said in the pre-race show on Sunday, it would have been very hard for me back in 2001 to believe anyone that will tell me you're going to appreciate Kansas more than Bristol someday. That Kansas will have better turnout than Bristol. after back-to-back race weekends, Kansas Speedway, I think, really much delivered on the hype where Bristol did not do that. I think this is something where the folks at Kansas Speedway have to take great pride in what they've done with that track, promoting that track. It has become a track where you got to see one or two races, truly a track that deserves to keep both races. Bristol, they need to work on something there because we saw Richmond's going to be down to one race. If Bristol cannot seem to be getting the kind of racing people anticipate pre 2007, or the kind of racing that just gets people happy that they spent the money to go there, they're going to go for other tracks. And Kansas is definitely one of those tracks that I think is becoming more and more popular each year. In my opinion, too, I think Kansas Speedway could be one of those tracks where it's still very young. Maybe someday there will be a race where people would see almost as a crown jewel status, but that is a long way to go. And the NASCAR Cup Series, of course, their championship still has a long way to go, but we'll bring back Kobe from MotoGP because their championship still has a ways to go, Kobe. And it just seems like whenever one rider has a championship lead, some points crashes out.
Yeah, Joe, I think you said it best at the top. This is like the championship that nobody wants to win. When I was going over all the details about this race for today's show, seeing how this is going up and down, it's like a seesaw. It's like literally the championship that no rider wants to win. It's just really crazy. It's like maybe we should award the championship to nobody this year if these two keep, having mistake after mistake after mistake. But a MotoGP race earlier today in Indonesia resulted in a dramatic shakeup in the championship battle on Saturday. Jorge Martin started on the pole and crashed on lap 1, but managed to get going. He finished 10th, one place short of scoring 1 point in the sprint race. But in the Grand Prix, Jorge Martin is now 21 points ahead of Pecco Bagnaia after going from pole to victory. 36 points is the maximum a driver can score, winning both the sprint and the Grand Prix. Joe, do you see any rider with a clear advantage with 5 races to go?
No, I don't. Like you said, this just seems to be one of those deals where the rider claims the championship lead. Next thing you know, they fall out. That's what I was thinking in the sprint race. First lap, Jorge Martin is leading Pecco Bagnaia. Okay, this could be a good battle between the two of them. And as they're wrapping up their first lap, Pecco Bagnaia goes sliding, spinning. Thankfully, for Pecco Bagnaia, where he spun out, it was all tarmac. No gravel trap. Nothing for tossing the bike around. The bike just skidded. You can see where the bike got damaged, got essentially grinded down from sliding, but he was able to keep going right on. Just coming up one position short of scoring points in that sprint race. Pecco Bagnaia just went on to take the win. But then in this race, the Grand Prix, Jorge Martin showing what he could do when he's at his best. Just go out there, get the win. He has such raw speed, pace in that bike. He could really deliver the fight. Pecco Bagnaia, I've sort of sensed that he was taking a little bit on the easier side just because he saw I don't have it against Jorge this weekend. But we're going to be racing again next weekend. A streak of races for MotoGP. So overall, I think this is a very even matchup between the two riders. Pecco in the factory Ducati, the Premac satellite team with Jorge Martin, who is leaving for Aprilia next year. It's going to be really interesting to see how this championship battle turns out.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. I think both riders are equally matched, but it's probably going to come down to who makes the least mistake and who doesn't make the last mistake heading into the championship round later on in the year. But yeah, it's definitely coming down to the very end. Going to be exciting to see what's going to happen and who ends up holding the MotoGP World Championship at the end of the year. It'll be quite a story for Jorge Martin to go out of Ducati into Aprilia, as the world champion. That would definitely certainly be something. And one dramatic moment that occurred when there was an engine fire for Marc Marquez, which ended up taking him out of the race. According to CrashNet.com, Marquez has been told that his championship hopes are over. However, mathematically, he's still in it if Martin and Bagnaia were to have more DNFs, but Marquez will have to be consistently in the top 3, mainly winning races. So in a way, it would basically be a must win every single race here on out for Marc Marquez to truly have a shot at the championship. So the odds are definitely stacked way against him right now. But given, the seesaw effect we've seen with Bagnaia and Martin, we definitely don't want to put that out of question. But I want to hear your opinion, Joe. Is Marc Marquez truly out of this championship battle?
I don't think so. And one of the big things for Marc Marquez, this is the first time in the championship bout in the sprint race era for him. When he won his past championships, he was not dealing with sprint races. It was just the Grand Prix races. So now with these sprint races, and this is the thing that has really just made this championship so different. In every sprint race, the top 9 riders will score points. If you crash out, well, the good news, you got the Grand Prix where the top 15 riders are going to score points. So for Marc Marquez, his championship hopes, I very much believe they're still alive. He is going to need to rely on Jorge Martin, Pecco Bagnaia to continue what they're doing and essentially having races where they fall out, they crash out, and he gets consistent podium after podium, because he cannot do it if he's getting, say, a couple podiums, top 5 finishes, but Jorge and Pecco Bagnaia are still finishing in the top 10, scoring a lot of points. He cannot do it if he's going to make mistakes, have issues like he has had earlier this season. It's very unfortunate to see that engine fire. I was really curious to see how he would do, especially after the sprint race where he went from 12th up towards the front. Marc Marquez, I think, still has a shot at this. The big thing, though, is just that expectation he's setting for himself. He might be thinking the championship's out of reach. Just go out there, get the wins. If he does that, guess what? If we see Pecco Bagnaia crashing out, if we see Jorge Martin crashing out, he's not, he could be in it. It is not over for Marc Marquez. I see a lot of his confidence back. I mean, we're talking about engine fire, something mechanical. We're not talking about a mistake he made. I see him still an eligible championship contender. He's just going to need some luck with the way this season's going. And I think a lot of it is because this is the second time we have the sprint race format. We're seeing how the sprint races are essentially allowing riders to have mistakes on weekends, but you have another race, whether it's the Grand Prix or the sprint race, to still gain points and not just have a big fat zero at the end of the weekend.
Yeah, and in a way, Joe, the MotoGP sprint races kind of reminds me of stage points that we have in NASCAR, because you see you'll have a driver win stage 1 and stage 2, dominate the race, and then in stage 3, you'll either see them get involved in an accident or have like a mechanical issue of some sort. And in the old age of NASCAR, that happened, what you did early in the race didn't really matter. And then it was a frustratingly long day. But if you run consistently up front, get those stage points, and something bad goes wrong, you can mitigate, what was a very disappointing ending, and you can still end up coming out with a good point stay, even if you do finish towards the back. Yeah, so in a way, I'd really like to compare these MotoGP sprint races to stage points you have in NASCAR, because it can truly help keep you in the fight. And just like we're seeing with some of the NASCAR playoff drivers this year, thank goodness for Kyle Larson and Tyler Reddick stage points, so they would really be in trouble right now. So I think that's an interesting comparison. And Joe, I want to know your opinion on that as well. Like, do you think there's a comparison between the MotoGP sprint races and the stage racing we see in NASCAR with the stage points that are awarded?
Easily, yeah, because you look at MotoGP, those essentially sprint races, they're going to be every single race weekend. You could have a bad sprint race. You're going to miss out on those points, but they're half the points of the Grand Prix. So essentially, you will need 2 Grand Prix wins. Two sprint race wins to equal 1 Grand Prix win. So the incentive is still the Grand Prix is the most important part. But in the case of like Jorge Martin, especially last year, where he's getting a lot more sprint race wins, but not getting the job done in the Grand Prix, he was still a championship contender till the end. Prior to that, when we didn't have the sprint races, he was not exactly that championship contender. He was just crashing out, being very inconsistent. For Pecco Bagnaia, such a huge lead, but he doesn't do good in the sprint races. So the 7 Grand Prix wins, that's great. He leads all the riders, but in the sprint races, it's just not showing there. So it's really changed the dynamics. So I think comparing it to the stage points is a great way of seeing, okay, stage points, this is how much it matters when it comes to that championship. The big goal is still the Grand Prix win, but that sprint race is very important, especially since it's every single race weekend. You cannot just take it easy. And MotoGP has no bonus points for pole, like F1, IndyCar, Formula E. No bonus points for leading lap or leading the most lap. It's just going out there, getting good finishes. So the sprint races definitely adds a new element.
Yeah, for sure. And we have 5 drivers. I mean, 5 riders who are left in the MotoGP World Championship. And 4 of those are Ducati riders. Pedro Acosta would basically have to win every single race going forward in order to keep his championship hopes alive, which is unfortunately for the rookie unlikely to happen. Jorge Martin and Pecco Bagnaia, but they're currently at the very top of the MotoGP World Championship, battling for that. But they're also still in the running for the grid ranking World Championship lead as well. So we'll see who can go 2 for 2, maybe.
Yeah, grid ranking week 26. We're getting down towards the end. Here is the top 10. Pecco Bagnaia continues to lead, but his score dropped to 17.11. He's still ahead of Will Brown. Martini did get some ground, but look, he's still in 3rd place behind Will Brown. Of course, MotoGP is racing next weekend. The next time we'll see the Supercar Series will be for the Bathurst 1000, and Martin could have really gotten 2nd place had he not crashed in the sprint race, at least gotten a win or maybe a podium. So, Kobe, when it comes to the grid ranking, this year, we talked about last weekend, very low scoring. We don't have Max Verstappen just leading from start to finish. We have multiple lead changes. These are the active drivers and riders that still have a shot at the Grid Ranking World Championship, depending on how they do in their races and how the others do in their respective races. You got Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Pecco Bagnaia, Jorge Martin, Enea Bastianini, and Marc Marquez, Will Brown, Chas Mosser, Brock Feeney, and even Kyle Larson and Tyler Reddick. Now, there's all sorts of different scenarios, whether it's Max Verstappen getting a bunch of wins and Pecco Bagnaia not winning again. You know, if Kyle Larson, Tyler Reddick were to get a ton of wins, of course, Will Brown, we got, 2 race weekends with 4 races total, plus the 5th one over at Bathurst. There's so many big moments, big races up ahead. Which races across the grid rankings stand out as the big time races that could play a major impact on this championship?
I think I'll go with the easy answer here. All of them, right? And I know that's the easy way out, but looking at the situation we've seen in Formula One emerge with McLaren taking the step up over Red Bull right now, I think the what's happening in Formula One right now, it could really come down to, if Red Bull can get this car in the right place, just enough for this final stretch to try to salvage, the championship round. Obviously for Max, we'll see what they do in the constructor, but for the grid ranking, I think it's going to come down to if Max Verstappen and Red Bull, can keep this car just consistently high enough where they can get up there and try to make some noise. But but with Pecco Bagnaia, Jorge Martin, like we were talking about on our MotoGP segment, it's going to come down to who makes the less mistakes. And if he makes more mistakes, then obviously he's going to suffer. But the big thing for like the supercars drivers and all that, I think the Bathurst 1000 is going to be huge, because it's not just them in the car. They also have a co-driver. You're going to need your co-driver to go out there, do his job, and make sure that they're putting you in the best possible position to succeed. And if not, you can see your grid ranking world championship slide away, because Will Brown is the one who's in really good position right now. And as you remember, your grid ranking, I think it was just a couple of years ago, you remember Shane Van Gisbergen was going to be the grid ranking world champion, and then he had an incident, very late in the race. I believe it was like the final laps of the Bathurst 1000. His SVG had it all in the bag, and all of a sudden, I think he had like a tire go down or something, and he lost the grid ranking world championship just like that. That's something I will never forget, because we were really calling him on behind the scenes on our private jet. We're like, yep, SVG has this in the bag. And all of a sudden, we're celebrating Sebastian Ogier as the grid ranking world champion. So I think out of all the races remaining in the grid ranking world championship this year, that Bathurst 1000 is probably going to be the most telling one. If I had to pick who's going to win our world championship right now here at Grid Network, it's probably going to come from MotoGP or supercars.
2021 Bathurst 1000. That was, like you said, we were thinking SVG got this, and then he's slowing. What's going on? He has a flat tire. I believe he had to finish like third place or better, and he was in the position to win. And sure enough, Sebastian Ogier, 2021 grid ranking world champion, Bathurst 1000. That's going to be a big race. MotoGP, I think if we get any race with rain, especially Thailand, that could be a big changing moment, because we know Marc Marquez loves the rain. You got the wild card with Miguel Oliveira at Trackhouse. He loves the rain races. He's won at Thailand before under wet conditions. Phillip Head Island is almost like a super speedway when it comes to the big packs. That's going to be very phenomenal for MotoGP. NASCAR's just a wild card. I don't know what's going to happen, but I think most likely he's going to be a supercar driver in Will Brown or Jorge Pecco, one of those riders, but it's going to be very interesting seeing now one group I'm not talking about. World Rally Championship, Rally Chile this weekend. Kyle Busch took the win today. Sebastian Ogier was in the field, but he went on the ditch Saturday. Essentially, some folks from Dirtfish had to help push him out, because in World Rally Championship, spectators are allowed to help push the vehicles out. He was able to continue on. Thierry Neuville finished fourth place. So right now, Tonic, who finished third, podium, essentially when it comes to the championship with just a couple races remaining, when it comes to WRC and the grid ranking, that's not going to happen. Both of them falling out of the top 10, Thierry Neuville and Sebastian Ogier. As for the World Rally Championship themselves, it looks like Thierry Neuville has a very much an easy chance to claim his first championship. And I got to ask you, with the two races left in World Rally Championship, Neuville leads Tonic, his teammate. Ogier is third in the World Rally Championship point standings. Is it finally destined for Thierry Neuville at the age of 36 to claim his first World Rally Championship?
Yeah, I think the way things have been set up this year in World Rally Championship, we've been talking about it all year long, been kind of wacky this year, with Robin-Perrin and Ogier coming in, and stealing the thunder from the full-timers and all that. You see part-timer Robin-Perrin won again today. And looking at how things are, I just really think that this is year for Thierry Neuville to get the job done and win his first World Rally Championship, which will be incredible for him at 36 years old, getting closer towards 40. I guess you don't really think of, you really think that you would probably win your championship a lot earlier in your career. But I guess Thierry Neuville, whenever a championship's on the line like this, you take him however you can. So if he ends up winning this championship, that would be really special for him, and it would definitely be well deserved. It really, like we said, it's been really hard to find someone who has been consistently dominant in World Rally Championship this year, just kind of all over the place, especially with the full timers.
Yeah, with the full timers just not having the kind of performances. And then you have the part-timers coming in, taking the wins. It has been a very unique situation in World Rally Championship. Taking a look at the full grid ranking, of course, as you can see, the top 10, as I mentioned, Thierry Neuville, Sebastian Ogier fell to 11th and 12th. Now, one of the unique things, as we mentioned, all the drivers and riders are still in contention. There is still a mathematical possibility that Alex Palou in fifth place could find himself at the grid rank world championship if all the riders and drivers ahead of him just have extremely bad luck, poor finishes. Very low chance of that happening, but it is very possible, because at the end of the day, scores could go up or down depending on each race. And of course, one of the big things, next race weekend, we only have MotoGP and NASCAR. So a simple weekend of the grid ranking, because Formula One has a little bit of a break for World Rally before they return back to action. Then, of course, we still got supercars, the Bathurst 1000 coming up. Kobe, a lot of good shiny moments ahead for us.
Yeah, for sure. It's time for our Group 1 Shine moment from this racing weekend. If you're watching live or later on replay, please let us know down in the comments below what's the one thing that stood out the most to you from this racing weekend. And I guess I'll go first. Actually, I have two shining moments I want to share. My first one shining moment, got to give it to Alex Bowman from Hendrick Motorsports. It's been incredible the run that he's been on in this playoffs. I think he's really surprising a lot of people at how well he's performed. He ended up securing his playoff spot when he won that Wild Street race in Chicago in the wet. And despite Alex Bowman making the playoffs and performing well, it always seems like that he's always under pressure and that people are always questioning his seat at Hendrick Motorsports. And despite all of the pressure and all of the calls to replace him, Alex Bowman continues to prove all the doubters wrong, and I think it's very impressive that he's continued to rise above the rest and not let the outside noise deter him. And looking at how he's done in this year's playoffs and in the first few races of the playoffs, he has a 5th place finish at Atlanta. Just inside the top 20 at Walkersville, not that great, and then back-to-back top 10s at the Bristol night race in Kansas. And Bowman is really rising above the rest right now, and I think he's silencing anyone who says that he does not deserve his seat. So got to give a shout to Alex Bowman there. And a second one shining moment, how about Corey LaJoie getting a top 15 in the Rick Webb racing car? And for Corey LaJoie, this is basically an audition these last 7 races of the season to see if he's a good fit for Rick Ware heading into next year's. And I think Corey LaJoie is off to a good start. To get a top 50 in this 51 car, definitely a big deal for him, and we'll see what he can do moving forward. We know he's a solid super speedway racer, and where are we going next week? Talladega. So next week could be a really good opportunity for Corey LaJoie to shine once again. And before I hand over to you, Joe, I also want to acknowledge what the situation that's happening right now in my home state of North Carolina. We're very sad right now about what's happening. As I'm sure you all know, the western part of our state in the mountains, they were affected by Hurricane Helene, and those communities are really suffering right now. So if you are able to, want to encourage you to go to the American Red Cross's website and please donate, because people in western North Carolina really, really need help. If you've seen the photos, videos coming out there, what we've seen so far is truly devastating, catastrophic, and it's a situation that I've never seen before. Many of us have never seen. I can't even imagine what that would look like in person. And just got a report from the Black Mountain Fire Department, Joe, saying that another dam failure is imminent. So those people are already suffering really badly. Places still underwater. And here we go again with another potential dam failure. So they're telling people to evacuate it if they can. I already know travel is really hard enough throughout the mountain. So I don't know where those people are going to go. I just hope the dam doesn't break, but they're concerned that it is. And we already know what's going to happen, if it does. It's just a really tragic situation. Just heartbroken what's happening in Western North Carolina, Joe.
Very tragic, thinking of everyone there. And of course, as Kobe said, visit the Red Cross. And of course, if you're in the area, be sure to pay attention if there's any advisories or evacuation orders for you. Thinking of everyone in the Carolinas and as well as Tennessee as well. For my shining moment, it's going to come from MotoGP, and it's going to go to the rookie Pedro Acosta. What a season this rookie's having. To be top 5 in the points standing for MotoGP in the gas bike, a year-old KTM. Originally thought, okay, you're going to be the rookie. We might give you some experimental parts to experiment with during the race weekends. He is making the best of it. Now he's going to be in the factory KTM. I cannot wait to see what he's going to do there with Brad Binder. Same time, I got to be honest, I think this is going to put Brad Binder under pressure. You got this young rider coming up. You got to perform as well, too. We've seen Brad Binder get the wins. Pedro Acosta, what an effort. Second place this race weekend. Hats off to him, continuing his strong season. Couple mistakes here and there, but this rookie has, I think, really impressed a lot of people and could be a future champion in MotoGP. And of course, if he's this good on the gas, if KTM can have a solid bike to run against Ducati, Aprilia, we might have a wonderful 2025 season for MotoGP. And of course, we still have a lot of wonderful races to recap, but we're going to do that tomorrow. Grid Encore. Ben and Brandon will be back for another Motor Monday episode where they're going to recap the Xfinity Series, Truck Series, and ARC Series, all of them at Kansas Speedway. Then, of course, Kobe's going to be back on the air. Grid tonight, recapping the latest motorsports news, including some big news that have been occurring throughout the weekend. And Matt White will be back with the Endurance Performance Index update for week 27. Women in motorsports. We're going to be recapping Isabella's unfortunately short race from pole and talking about the NHRA's new policy where female drivers can transfer points to a substitute driver if they're away for family planning or pregnancy. Very revolutionary in motorsports. Could that expand to other forms? And then, of course, we'll do this all over again. Grid Live pre-race for NASCAR MotoGP and the wrap-up show next Sunday. For Kobe Lambeth, I'm Joe Samdiego. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time.